Chapter 1 New Year's Glow. The last day of December had dressed the city in glitter. Strings of lights clung to lampposts like stubborn ivy, and the air carried that crisp promise of something new, something better. Cathy Towns stood by the window of her apartment, watching snowflakes tumble like tiny acrobats under the streetlights. Behind her, the hum of laughter and clinking glasses filled the room. Ryan, her fiancé of 3 years, was sprawled on the couch like a man who had conquered the world, or at least the snack table. He wore his favorite navy sweater, the one Cathy secretly hated because it had a hole near the cuff he refused to acknowledge. His hair was slightly tousled, his smile easy, and his eyes, those warm hazel eyes, tracked her every move like she was the only person in the room. "You're staring," Cathy teased, turning from the window with a grin. "Guilty," Ryan said, lifting his glass in mock salute. "Just making sure the future misses." "Ryan Blake hasn't changed her mind before midnight." Cathy laughed, crossing the room to join him. "Please. You're lucky I didn't change my mind after you tried to put pineapple on the Christmas ham." "That was culinary innovation," Ryan protested, sitting up. "History will vindicate me." "History will gag," Cathy shot back, settling beside him. His arms slid around her shoulders, warm and familiar, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. The kind of perfect that made her chest ache with gratitude. "Big year ahead," Ryan murmured, kissing her temple. "Wedding in June. Honeymoon in Italy. Maybe a house by Christmas." Cathy smiled, letting the words sink in like sunlight. This was the life she'd planned, the life she'd fought for through college exams, late-night work deadlines, and the chaos of family drama. She had a career she loved, a man who adored her, and a Pinterest board full of wedding ideas that could make Martha Stewart weep. "Speaking of family," Ryan said, reaching for the remote. "Did you talk to your mom about the aisle thing?" Cathy nodded, a flicker of pride in her voice. "She suggested something really thoughtful, actually. Stepdad walks me down the aisle. Dad does the speeches and first dance. It's fair, you know? Shows appreciation for both." Ryan hesitated, thumb hovering over the remote. "And your dad's okay with that?" "Of course," Cathy said, too quickly. He understands everything. Always has." Ryan didn't look convinced, but he let it go, switching the channel to the New Year's countdown. Cathy leaned back, her mind drifting to her father. Quiet, steady, dependable. He'd never been the type to make a fuss. Even when her parents divorced, he'd walked away without arguments or tears, like a man surrendering to gravity. She'd always admired that strength, even if it came wrapped in silence. She remembered telling him about her mom's remarriage, bracing for anger that never came. All he said was good for her. No bitterness, no sarcasm. Just those 3 words, like a stamp on an envelope he'd already mailed to the past. Cathy swallowed, pushing the thought aside. Tonight wasn't for old ghosts. Tonight was for champagne and resolutions and kissing Ryan at midnight like they were the only 2 people in the universe. 10 minutes, Ryan announced, glancing at the clock. "Any resolutions?" Cathy smirked. "Be more patient. Stop overthinking. And maybe, just maybe, learn to tolerate pineapple on ham." Ryan grinned, pulling her closer. "I'll drink to that." They clinked glasses, laughter spilling into the room like confetti. Outside, fireworks began to bloom against the velvet sky, and Cathy felt the weight of the year ahead settle on her shoulders. Not heavy, but warm, like a blanket stitched with hope. She didn't know it yet, but this was the last night her life would feel perfectly aligned. The last night before the cracks in her carefully drawn map began to show. For now, though, she kissed Ryan at midnight, tasting champagne and promises, and whispered against his lips, "This is going to be our year." Chapter 2, The Invitation. The first week of January smelled like fresh starts and printer ink. Cathy sat cross-legged on the living room rug, surrounded by a battlefield of envelopes, stamps, and glitter pens that had staged a coup against her sanity. The wedding invitations were supposed to be elegant, timeless, something that whispered sophistication. Instead, her coffee table looked like a craft store had exploded. Ryan wandered in, holding a mug of coffee like a peace offering. "You look intense," he said, eyeing the chaos. "Should I call FEMA?" Cathy shot him a look over the rim of her glasses. "Don't mock the process. This is art." "This is war," Ryan countered, setting the mug down and crouching beside her. "How many have you done?" 32, Cathy said, blowing a strand of hair from her face. "Only 68 to go." Ryan whistled low. Email exists. Email is for utility bills and dentist reminders," Cathy said, uncapping a gold pen with dramatic flair. "This is a wedding. People frame these things." Ryan grinned. "People recycle these things." Cathy ignored him, focusing on the card in front of her. She'd saved this one for last, the one addressed to her father. She wanted it to be perfect, like a tiny olive branch dipped in glitter. She wrote his name slowly, each letter deliberate, then slid the invitation inside with a handwritten note tucked neatly behind it. "Dad, I wanted to let you know that Stepdad will walk me down the aisle. You'll have the speeches and the first dance. I thought this way everyone feels included. I know you'll understand like you always do. Love, Cathy." She read it twice, searching for any trace of insensitivity, but all she saw was fairness, balance, the kind of compromise that kept families from imploding like bad soufflés. Ryan leaned over her shoulder, reading silently. You sure about this? Cathy capped the pen with a snap. Positive. It's the right thing. Ryan hesitated, then kissed her cheek. If you're happy, I'm happy. She smiled, grateful for his unwavering support, even if his tone carried a faint question mark. Cathy sealed the envelope, pressing the flap like it held the weight of destiny, and stacked it with the others. Want me to drop these at the post office? Ryan asked, gathering the pile. Please, Cathy said, stretching her arms above her head. If I see another stamp today, I'll start hallucinating George Washington. Ryan laughed, scooping up the invitations. Back in a bit. Don't drown in glitter. When the door clicked shut behind him, Cathy sank into the couch, exhaustion settling like a heavy quilt. She stared at the neat stack of envelopes, imagining them as tiny messengers carrying pieces of her heart across the miles. Everything was falling into place, the venue, the dress, the flowers. Even the aisle arrangement felt like a diplomatic triumph. She didn't call her dad to make sure he got the note. Why would she? He'd never been the type to make drama out of details. He was steady, predictable, a man who understood without needing explanations. Cathy smiled, picturing his quiet nod when he read the card. Maybe he'd even smile that tired smile she'd grown used to over the years. The one that said, I'm here. I'm fine. Don't worry about me. She believed it. She had to. Because if there was one thing Cathy knew about her father, it was this. He always understood. Chapter 3: The Calm Before the Storm. By mid-February, Cathy's apartment looked like a wedding magazine had exploded. Swatches of ivory and blush draped over chairs, a tower of bridal catalogs loomed in the corner, and the dining table had been permanently converted into a command center for Operation Happily Ever After. Cathy sat at the head of the table, laptop open, scrolling through a spreadsheet that looked more complicated than a NASA launch sequence. Ryan leaned against the counter, sipping coffee like a man observing a controlled burn. You know, he said, I think you've officially crossed into general territory. Cathy glanced up, brow furrowed. General territory? Yeah, Ryan said, gesturing at the chaos. You're not planning a wedding anymore. You're planning a military campaign. Cathy smirked. If I don't, we'll end up with mismatched napkins and a DJ who thinks Cotton Eye Joe is a romantic ballad. Ryan grinned, pushing off the counter to join her. Fair point. So, what's today's battle plan? Finalize the seating chart, Cathy said, tapping the screen. And confirm the florist. Oh, and I need to call the bakery because apparently fondant is controversial now. Ryan chuckled, sliding into the chair beside her. You're amazing, you know that? Cathy softened, leaning into his shoulder. You're biased. Completely, Ryan said, kissing her hair. But still true. For a moment, the whirlwind of planning faded, replaced by the quiet hum of their shared future. Cathy let herself breathe, savoring the warmth of his presence. This was what mattered. Not the napkins or the fondant or the endless parade of decisions. Just them. Her phone buzzed, shattering the calm. Cathy glanced at the screen. Mom. She sighed, answering with a practiced smile in her voice. Hey, Mom. Sweetheart. Her mother's voice was bright, effervescent, like champagne bubbles. Just checking in. How's my bride-to-be? Busy, Cathy said, laughing. But good. What's up? Oh, nothing major, her mom said, which Cathy knew was code for something major. Just wanted to confirm the ceremony details. Stepdad is so honored to walk you down the aisle. Cathy smiled, even as a tiny knot formed in her stomach. Yeah, I think it's the right call. Dad will have the speeches and the first dance. Perfect, her mom said, sounding relieved. You're so thoughtful, Cathy. Always thinking of everyone. Cathy hung up a few minutes later, the knot still lingering. She shook it off, telling herself it was nothing. Her dad would understand. He always did. Ryan watched her, brow raised. Everything okay? Fine, Cathy said, forcing a smile. Just Mom being Mom. Ryan didn't press, but his silence spoke volumes. Cathy turned back to her laptop, determined to drown the unease in logistics. She had a wedding to plan, a perfect wedding, and perfect weddings didn't leave room for second-guessing. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the window, soft and silent, like secrets waiting to fall. Chapter 3: The Calm Before the Storm. By mid-February, Cathy's apartment looked like a wedding magazine had exploded. Swatches of ivory and blush draped over chairs, a tower of bridal catalogs loomed in the corner, and the dining table had been permanently converted into a command center for Operation Happily Ever After. Cathy sat at the head of the table, laptop open, scrolling through a spreadsheet that looked more complicated than a NASA launch sequence. Ryan leaned against the counter, sipping coffee like a man observing a controlled burn. You know, he said, I think you've officially crossed into general territory. Cathy glanced up, brow furrowed. General territory? Yeah, Ryan said, gesturing at the chaos. You're not planning a wedding anymore. You're planning a military campaign. Cathy smirked. If I don't, we'll end up with mismatched napkins and a DJ who thinks Cotton Eye Joe is a romantic ballad. Ryan grinned, pushing off the counter to join her. Fair point. So, what's today's battle plan? Finalize the seating chart, Cathy said, tapping the screen. And confirm the florist. Oh, and I need to call the bakery because apparently fondant is controversial now. Ryan chuckled, sliding into the chair beside her. You're amazing, you know that? Cathy softened, leaning into his shoulder. You're biased. Completely, Ryan said, kissing her hair. But still true. For a moment, the whirlwind of planning faded, replaced by the quiet hum of their shared future. Cathy let herself breathe, savoring the warmth of his presence. This was what mattered. Not the napkins or the fondant or the endless parade of decisions. Just them. Her phone buzzed, shattering the calm. Cathy glanced at the screen. Mom. She sighed, answering with a practiced smile in her voice. Hey, Mom. Sweetheart. Her mother's voice was bright, effervescent, like champagne bubbles. Just checking in. How's my bride-to-be? Busy, Cathy said, laughing. But good. What's up? Oh, nothing major, her mom said, which Cathy knew was code for something major. Just wanted to confirm the ceremony details. Stepdad is so honored to walk you down the aisle. Cathy smiled, even as a tiny knot formed in her stomach. Yeah, I think it's the right call. Dad will have the speeches and the first dance. Perfect, her mom said, sounding relieved. You're so thoughtful, Cathy. Always thinking of everyone. Cathy hung up a few minutes later, the knot still lingering. She shook it off, telling herself it was nothing. Her dad would understand. He always did. Ryan watched her, brow raised. Everything okay? Fine, Cathy said, forcing a smile. Just mom being mom. Ryan didn't press, but his silence spoke volumes. Cathy turned back to her laptop, determined to drown the unease in logistics. She had a wedding to plan, a perfect wedding, and perfect weddings didn't leave room for second-guessing. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the window, soft and silent, like secrets waiting to fall. Chapter 4: The Wedding Day. The morning of the wedding dawned like a watercolor painting, soft hues bleeding into one another, the sky a pale canvas brushed with gold. Cathy stood before the mirror in her bridal suite, the satin of her gown whispering against her skin as she turned slowly, taking in the reflection that didn't quite feel real. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo, a few curls framing her face like delicate parentheses. The veil cascaded down her back, sheer and weightless, as if even gravity respected the sanctity of this day. She should have felt like a queen. Instead, she felt like a soldier about to march into battle. Heart pounding, nerves taut. Breathe, her maid of honor, Jenna, said from behind her, adjusting the train. You look like you're about to negotiate a hostage situation. Cathy laughed, the sound brittle. Just wedding jitters. Please, Jenna said, rolling her eyes. You've been planning this since Pinterest was invented. You've got this. Cathy smiled, letting Jenna's confidence wash over her like a bomb. She had this. She had Ryan, steady, loving Ryan, waiting at the altar. She had family and friends gathered to celebrate. Everything was perfect. Almost. Her gaze flicked to the empty chair in the corner, where her father should have been sitting during the final prep. He'd promised to be here early, but maybe he was running late. He was always punctual, though. Always. Ready? Jenna asked, holding out the bouquet like a peace offering. Cathy nodded, gripping the flowers as if they could anchor her. The scent of roses filled her lungs, sweet and heady, masking the faint ache in her chest. The ceremony space was breathtaking. Arched windows spilling sunlight across rows of white chairs, the aisle lined with petals like a trail of promises. Cathy's heart swelled as she stepped into view, the murmur of guests rising like a tide. Cameras flashed, smiles bloomed, and there, at the altar, Ryan stood in his tailored suit, eyes locked on her like she was the only star in his sky. Her stepfather appeared at her side, offering his arm with a proud smile. Cathy slid her hand through his elbow, forcing her lips into a curve that felt almost natural. This was the plan. The fair plan. The right plan. As they began the slow walk down the aisle, Cathy's gaze swept the rows instinctively, searching for her father's face. First row empty. Second row empty. Her stomach tightened. She scanned again, faster this time, her pulse drumming in her ears. No dad. No cousins. No aunts. No one from his side except Grandma Margaret. She sat in the second row, her posture regal, her expression carved from stone. Her eyes met Cathy's, and in that single glance, Cathy felt the temperature of the room drop 10 degrees. There was no smile, no warmth, just a look that sliced through satin and lace and landed deep in her bones. Before Cathy could process it, the music swelled, and she was at the altar, Ryan's hands closing around hers like lifelines. His smile was pure sunlight, and for a moment, the shadows receded. Vows were spoken, rings exchanged, promises sealed with a kiss that tasted of forever. The applause roared. Cathy smiled for the cameras, her heart a fractured mirror reflecting joy and unease in equal measure. She told herself it didn't matter. Maybe Dad had car trouble. Maybe something came up. She'd call him later, laugh about how he missed the big moment but made it to the party. Except when they walked hand in hand out of the church, the truth hit her like a cold wind. He wasn't at the reception either. Chapter 5: The Dance. The reception shimmered with golden light, laughter spilling like champagne across the ballroom. Cathy moved through the crowd in a haze of joy and exhaustion, her satin gown trailing like a comet's tail. Ryan was magnetic, shaking hands, hugging relatives, flashing that smile that made Cathy believe in forever. She was still riding the high of the ceremony when the DJ's voice boomed over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a very special moment. The father-daughter dance. The words hit Cathy like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading fast. Her heart skipped. She scanned the room, searching for her father's face among the sea of smiles. First row empty. Near the bar empty. Dessert table still no dad. Her pulse quickened. Maybe he was running late. Maybe he'd stepped outside for air. Maybe, stepdad? The DJ called cheerfully, gesturing toward the dance floor. Come on up. Cathy's stomach sank. She forced a smile as her stepfather approached, his grin wide, his arms open like a man stepping into a spotlight he'd been waiting for. Guests clapped, oblivious to the storm brewing behind Cathy's eyes. The opening notes of I Loved Her First floated through the speakers, sweet and cruel. Cathy's throat tightened as her stepfather took her hand, leading her into the slow sway of the dance. Cameras flashed, people smiled, and Cathy smiled too, because what else could she do? Her cheeks ached with the effort, her heart splintering beneath the weight of the song. She thought of her father then, quiet, steadfast, the man who had held her first, kissed her forehead after nightmares, clapped the loudest at school plays, the man who had never asked for anything except the honor of being her dad. And here she was, dancing with someone else while that honor lay discarded like confetti on the floor. Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, willing the tears back, but the lyrics pressed against her ribs like thorns. I loved her first. I held her first. The words weren't just lyrics, they were accusations. Halfway through the song, Cathy almost pulled away, almost fled to the bathroom to drown in guilt. But before she could move, a voice rose from the microphone near the DJ booth, clear, sharp, and laced with something that made the room freeze. Excuse me. The music faltered, then stopped altogether. Heads turned. Cathy turned too, and saw her grandmother, Margaret, standing center stage with a microphone in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. Her posture was regal, her expression carved from granite. The room hushed, curiosity crackling like static. Margaret's voice carried, calm but heavy. I just want to say a few words about my granddaughter. Cathy's stomach nodded. She knew that tone. It wasn't the tone of sweet anecdotes and gentle praise. It was the tone of storms. Margaret began softly, speaking of memories. Cathy as a child, Cathy's laughter, Cathy's bright future. Guests smiled, nodding, lulled by nostalgia. But then Margaret's gaze locked on Cathy, and the air shifted. Family, she said, her voice sharpening like a blade. Family is everything. And tonight, I have to ask one question. The room leaned in. Cathy's breath caught. Why? The single word cracked through the silence like thunder. Cathy opened her mouth, but no sound came. Margaret didn't wait. My son couldn't be here tonight, she continued, her tones slicing through the murmurs. Not because he didn't want to, but because tonight, the last honor a father has, the honor of walking his daughter down the aisle, was stolen from him. Gasps rippled. Cathy's blood turned to ice. Margaret's eyes burned into hers. He was the first to hold you when you were born, the first to kiss you, the first to promise he'd protect you with his life. And he kept that promise. Through every scraped knee, every bad dream, every heartbreak. He never asked for anything, except recognition that he mattered. Cathy's throat closed. Her mother's face had gone pale, lips pressed tight. Ryan stood frozen, his hand hovering near Cathy's arm like he could shield her from words that cut deeper than knives. Margaret's voice dropped, low and lethal. And while you were planning this wedding, did anyone tell you the truth? That the man who walked you down the aisle tonight isn't just your stepfather. He's the man your mother cheated with. The man who destroyed your family. The room erupted in whispers, sharp and jagged. Cathy's ears rang. Her mother's eyes darted like trapped birds, searching for escape. Cathy felt the floor tilt beneath her, reality cracking open like glass. Margaret lifted the bottle of wine, her voice trembling now. Not with weakness, but with fury contained. He bought this the day you were born. Saved it for this day. For you. For your husband. For 28 years your father waited for this moment to share with you as you started your new life. He was proud to be your father, even when it cost him personally. Catherine, I love you, but I cannot express in words how disappointed I am in the person you've become. She dropped the bottle. Time slowed as Cathy watched the bottle slowly fall. It shattered against the floor, shards glittering like broken promises, wine bleeding across the marble like spilled years. The sound was deafening in the silence that followed. Margaret looked at Cathy one last time, her voice low, almost tender. You don't deserve the love your father gave you. Then she turned and walked out, leaving a room so quiet you could hear the shards settling. Cathy stood frozen, her heart a hollow drum, her perfect wedding collapsing in slow motion. And for the first time all day, she wished the music would start again. Anything to drown out the truth echoing in her ears. Chapter 6, The Fallout. The ballroom was silent, but not the kind of silence that soothed. This was the brittle, jagged quiet that follows an explosion, the kind that hums with shock and judgment. Cathy stood rooted to the dance floor, her bouquet trembling in her grip, her pulse pounding like a war drum. Margaret's words still echoed in her skull. The man who walked you down the aisle tonight isn't just your stepfather. He's the man your mother cheated with. Cheated. Destroyed your family. Cathy's breath came shallow, her chest tight as if the satin bodice had turned into a vice. Around her, whispers bloomed like weeds, soft, poisonous tendrils curling through the crowd. Is that true? Did you know? Oh my God. Ryan's hand found hers, warm and steady, but Cathy barely felt it. Her gaze locked on her mother across the room. Perfect hair, perfect smile, now cracked like porcelain. Her stepfather hovered beside her, face flushed, jaw clenched, eyes darting anywhere but Cathy's. Cathy moved before she knew she was moving, her heels clicking like gunshots against the marble. The crowd parted, a living tide pulling back from the storm. She stopped inches from her mother, voice low and lethal. Tell me she's lying. Her mother's lips parted, but no sound came. Cathy's stomach dropped, the silence louder than any confession. Mom! Her voice cracked, sharp enough to draw blood. Tell me Margaret is lying. Her mother swallowed, eyes glistening. Cathy, please not here. Not here. Cathy's laugh was hollow, jagged. She just detonated my wedding in front of 200 people, and you want to talk about timing? Her stepfather stepped forward, hands raised like a man approaching a wild animal. Cathy, listen. Don't. Her voice was ice. Don't you dare speak to me. He froze, color draining from his face. Cathy turned back to her mother, fury and heartbreak colliding in her chest like tectonic plates. How long? She demanded. How long have you been lying to me? Her mother's chin trembled. It was years ago, before the divorce. Cathy's vision blurred, rage and grief flooding her veins. You told me you and Dad just grew apart. You told me he walked away without a fight. Her mother's tears spilled, carving tracks through her makeup. I didn't want you to hate me. Cathy's laugh was sharp, bitter. Congratulations. Mission accomplished. The room was a gallery of stunned faces, every eye a spotlight burning her skin. Cathy felt exposed, gutted, like someone had peeled back her life and shown the rot beneath. She wanted to scream, to run, to rewind time to an hour ago when ignorance was bliss and her father was just late, not erased. Ryan's arm slid around her shoulders, firm and grounding. Cathy, he murmured, voice low, steady. Let's step outside. She shook her head violently. No, I'm not done. Her mother reached for her hand, but Cathy recoiled like the touch was acid. You didn't just cheat on Dad, she said, voice trembling with fury. You cheated me out of the truth, out of the chance to honor him. And now he's gone. He didn't even come because of you. Her mother sobbed, shoulders shaking. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me? Cathy's voice rose, slicing through the hush. You burned down my family and handed me the ashes like a gift. Ryan's grip tightened gently, his presence a lifeline in the wreckage. Cathy, he whispered. Please. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the worry etched in his face, the love steady in his eyes. It was enough to pull her back from the edge, if only by inches. Cathy straightened, spine rigid, voice cold as winter steel. We're leaving. Her mother's sob followed her like a ghost as Ryan guided her through the crowd, past the shards of glass and the crimson stain of spilled wine. Cathy didn't look back. She couldn't, because if she did, she might shatter completely. Outside, the night air hit her like a slap, sharp, clean, merciless. Cathy sucked in a breath, the cold burning her lungs, and for the first time all day, the tears came. Hot, unstoppable, carving rivers down her cheeks. Ryan pulled her close, his arms a fortress against the storm. I've got you, he murmured, over and over, like a prayer. But Cathy knew no one could fix this. Not Ryan, not time, because some truths don't just break you, they rewrite you. And tonight, Cathy Towns realized her perfect life was built on fault lines, and the earthquake had only just begun. Chapter 7, The Search. The night was a black canvas splattered with stars, but Cathy barely noticed. Her heels clicked against the pavement as Ryan's car pulled up to the curb, headlights slicing through the dark. He opened the door without a word, his jaw tight, his eyes soft with worry. Where to? He asked quietly. Cathy slid into the passenger seat, clutching her phone like a lifeline. My dad's place. Ryan nodded, pulling into the street. The silence between them was thick, punctuated only by the hum of tires on asphalt. Cathy stared out the window, her reflection ghosting back at her. Eyes swollen, mascara smudged, a bride unraveling at the seams. She tried calling him twice. No answer. Each ring was a needle stitching panic into her chest. She texted too. Dad, please. I need to see you. The message sat there, unread, like a door slammed in her face. Ryan reached over, his hand covering hers. We'll find him. Cathy swallowed hard, nodding, though her throat felt like sandpaper. He didn't even come, Ryan. He didn't come because of me. Ryan's grip tightened. He loves you. Not enough to show up, Cathy whispered, voice cracking. Not enough to forgive me for something I didn't even know. Ryan didn't argue. He knew better than to throw words at a wound this deep. They pulled into the quiet townhouse complex where her father lived, a row of brick homes standing like sentinels under the moonlight. Cathy's stomach churned as she climbed out, her heels sinking into the soft earth of the flower bed edging the walkway. She hurried to the door, heart pounding, and knocked hard enough to rattle the frame. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Dad, it's me. Still nothing. Cathy pressed her forehead to the door, tears stinging her eyes. Please, she whispered. Please don't shut me out. When she finally looked down, she saw it. A folded note tucked under the welcome mat, edges crisp, handwriting unmistakable. Her father's. She snatched it up, fingers trembling as she unfolded the paper. Live your life. I'll live mine. Dad, the words were simple, but they hit like a sledgehammer. Cathy's knees buckled, and she sank onto the stoop, the note fluttering in her lap like a white flag of surrender. Ryan crouched beside her, his arm wrapping around her shoulders, his voice low and steady. Cathy. She shook her head, choking on a sob. He's done. He's really done. Ryan didn't speak. He just held her, his silence saying what words couldn't, that he wasn't going anywhere, even if her father had. A soft thump broke the stillness. Cathy looked up, startled, and blinked at the sight of a pair of sapphire eyes glowing from the shadows. A sleek Siamese cat perched on the porch railing like royalty, tail flicking with imperious grace. Norman. Ryan read from the engraved tag dangling from the cat's collar. Well, hello, Norman. The cat leapt down with the elegance of a gymnast and strutted toward Cathy, rubbing against her gown like he owned it. Cathy let out a shaky laugh, the sound brittle but real. Of course Dad has a cat, she murmured, scratching Norman's chin. And of course he's dramatic. Norman purred like a tiny engine, then sprang onto the top of the porch light, balancing like gravity was optional. Ryan chuckled softly. Guess he takes after your dad. Cathy smiled faintly, clutching the note to her chest. The ache didn't fade, but for the first time since the ballroom shattered, she felt a flicker of something. Maybe hope, maybe just the absurdity of a cat perched like a gargoyle in the moonlight. Either way, it was enough to keep her breathing. Chapter 8. The Truth. Morning crept in like an unwelcome guest, gray light spilling across Cathy's bedroom floor, illuminating the wreckage of yesterday. Her wedding gown lay crumpled in a heap, a fallen queen stripped of her crown. Cathy sat on the edge of the bed, Ryan's arm draped around her shoulders, his steady breathing the only anchor in a sea of chaos. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, Margaret's voice echoed like a verdict. He's the man your mother cheated with, the man who destroyed your family. Cathy stared at her phone, thumb hovering over her grandmother's number. She'd avoided calling last night, afraid of what more truth might cost her. But silence was worse. Silence was a wound that festered. I need answers, she whispered. Ryan kissed her temple, his voice low. Then go get them. Margaret's house sat at the end of a quiet street, a stately brick home framed by towering oaks. Cathy parked at the curb, her stomach a knot of nerves. Ryan offered to come in, but she shook her head. This was her battle. She climbed the steps slowly, each one heavier than the last, and knocked. The door opened almost immediately, as if Margaret had been waiting. Her grandmother stood tall, silver hair swept into a bun, eyes sharp as cut glass. No smile, no warmth, just that same unyielding presence Cathy had seen at the reception. Cathy, Margaret said, voice cool. Come in. The living room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. Family photos lined the mantel, snapshots of birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings. Cathy's gaze snagged on one in particular. Her father holding her as a newborn, his smile wide, his eyes bright with a love that seemed limitless. Her throat tightened. Why didn't anyone tell me? Margaret settled into an armchair, her posture regal. Because your mother didn't want you to know. And your father, she sighed, the sound brittle. He thought silence was mercy. Cathy sank onto the couch, hands twisting in her lap. Mercy? He let me believe they just grew apart. They didn't grow apart, Margaret said, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. She betrayed him, with the man you let walk you down the aisle. The words landed like blows. Cathy flinched, tears stinging her eyes. He never said a word. Because he loved you, Margaret said simply. He didn't want you to carry the weight of her choices. He wanted you to have peace. Cathy's laugh was hollow. Peace? I humiliated him. I stole the one honor he had left. Margaret's gaze softened, but her tone stayed firm. You didn't steal it, Cathy. You gave it away without asking. That's the difference. Cathy pressed her palms to her eyes, sobs clawing at her throat. I didn't know. It wouldn't matter if you knew or not, Cathy. You gave your father's honor to another man, Margaret said, her voice gentler now. Ignorance doesn't erase the wound. Some things can't be undone. Cathy looked up, desperate. Can I fix it? Margaret shook her head slowly. Not with an apology. Not with flowers. Trust isn't a magic spell, child. It's a fragile glass vase. Once it cracks, love and hope start draining. The metaphor sliced through Cathy like a blade. She thought of her father's note. Live your life. I'll live mine. Final. Absolute. Margaret rose, crossing to a cabinet. She opened it and pulled out a small wooden box, pressing it into Cathy's hands. He left this here years ago. Said it was for you when you were ready to understand. Cathy opened the lid with trembling fingers. Inside lay a single photograph. Her father holding her at age 5, both grinning like fools, and a folded letter. She unfolded it, her breath catching as she read. My Cathy, if you're reading this, it means life didn't go the way I hoped. I wanted to walk you down the aisle. I wanted to hand you off to a man worthy of you. But if that didn't happen, know this, I love you. Always have. Always will. Live your life. Be happy. That's all I ever wanted. Dad, the tears came then, hot and relentless, blurring the words until they were just shapes on paper. Cathy clutched the letter to her chest, her sobs breaking the silence like glass. Margaret rested a hand on her shoulder, firm and steady. He's hurt, Cathy, but he's not gone. Not yet. If you want him back, you'll have to fight for him. Cathy nodded through the tears, resolve hardening like steel beneath the grief. I will. For the first time since the wedding shattered, Cathy felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was the spark of a promise. She would fight, even if it took forever. Chapter 9, The Confrontation. The cafe smelled of roasted coffee and rain-soaked pavement, the kind of scent that clings to memory. Cathy stood just inside the door, her pulse a frantic drumbeat as her eyes swept the room. And then she saw him. Her father sat at a corner table, posture straight, hands wrapped around a mug like it was the only warmth he allowed himself. He looked older than she remembered, lines etched deeper, hair more silver than gray, but his presence was the same. Quiet, solid, immovable as bedrock. For a moment, Cathy couldn't move. Her throat tightened, her chest constricted, and every word she'd rehearsed dissolved like sugar in water. She forced her legs forward, each step heavy with guilt. Dad, she whispered when she reached the table. He looked up slowly, his eyes calm, unreadable. Cathy. The single word was a door cracked open, but not wide enough to step through. Cathy slid into the chair opposite him, her hands trembling as they gripped the edge of the table. I'm sorry, she blurted, voice breaking. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Her father's gaze held hers, steady as a lighthouse in a storm. I believe you. The simplicity of it shattered her. Tears welled, spilling before she could stop them. Then why didn't you come? Why didn't you tell me? He set the mug down with deliberate care, his voice quiet but sharp enough to cut. Because it wasn't my day anymore. Cathy flinched. It was. It was supposed to be. He shook his head slowly. Not when you gave my place to him. Her breath hitched. I thought it was fair. I thought you'd understand. I do understand, he said, and the calm in his tone was worse than anger. I understand that you didn't ask. That you assumed I'd be fine watching another man take the last honor I had as your father. Cathy's sob clawed up her throat. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, he said again, and that quiet certainty gutted her. But intent doesn't erase impact. She pressed her palms to her eyes, words tumbling out like broken glass. I feel like I've lost you. He was silent for a long moment, then spoke softly. You haven't lost me, Cathy, but you've lost something you can't get back. Her hands dropped, her eyes searching his face desperately. Please, tell me how to fix this. His gaze didn't waver. Don't try because you're afraid of losing me. Try because you love me. I do, she whispered, voice trembling. I love you so much. He nodded, but his expression stayed solemn. Then show me, not with words, with time. The weight of his words settled like stones in her chest, heavy, immovable, but not hopeless. Cathy reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand. For a heartbeat, he let them rest there before pulling back gently. I have to go, he said, rising. Take care of yourself. And then he walked out, leaving Cathy in the quiet hum of the cafe, clutching the echo of his voice like a lifeline. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't closure. But it was something. A fragile thread she refused to let break. Chapter 10, The Turning Point. The days after the cafe meeting felt like walking through fog, thick, disorienting, every step uncertain. Cathy woke each morning with the same ache lodged in her chest, the same question gnawing at her. How do you prove love when words aren't enough? Her father's voice haunted her. Don't try because you're afraid of losing me. Try because you love me. She did love him, fiercely, but love without action was just air, and Cathy was done choking on silence. So she started small. The first gesture was a letter, handwritten, not typed. because ink felt more honest than pixels. She wrote slowly, each word deliberate, like stitching a torn seam. Dad, I can't undo what I did. I can't give you back that moment. But I can give you this, my promise to never take you for granted again. I love you. Always have. Always will. Cathy, she slipped it into his mailbox at dawn, heart pounding like a thief's. No text, no call. Just the letter, quiet and unassuming, like the man she was trying to reach. The second gesture came a week later. A framed photo of the two of them at her 5th birthday, grinning like conspirators over a lopsided cake. She left it on his porch with a note. Thought you might want this back. It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. But it was something, a breadcrumb on the path back to him. Ryan watched her through it all, never pushing, never prying. He was her anchor in the storm, steady and patient, even when Cathy's guilt spilled into tears at midnight. One evening, as they sat on the couch surrounded by half-packed honeymoon bags they hadn't touched, Ryan reached for her hand. You're doing the right thing, he said softly. Cathy shook her head, eyes glistening. It doesn't feel like enough. Maybe it's not, Ryan admitted. But it's honest, and that matters. She leaned into him, his warmth a shield against the chill of uncertainty. What if he never forgives me? Ryan kissed her hair, his voice a whisper against her skin. Then you keep loving him anyway. The simplicity of it cracked something open inside her. A truth she'd been too tangled in guilt to see. Forgiveness wasn't a finish line. It was a road. And roads were meant to be walked, even if they stretched on forever. 2 weeks later, Cathy drove past her father's townhouse, heart thudding as she spotted the photo she'd left, now hanging in the front window. It wasn't a message. It wasn't a miracle. But it was a sign. And for the first time since the wedding shattered, Cathy let herself hope. Chapter 11, The New Normal. Spring had softened the edges of winter, painting the world in green and gold. Cathy parked her car under a blooming dogwood tree, her stomach a knot of nerves. It had been 3 months since the wedding, 3 months of letters, photos, and quiet gestures left like breadcrumbs on her father's doorstep. And today, for the first time, he'd agreed to meet her. She spotted him at the park, sitting on a weathered bench beneath an oak tree, sunlight dappling his shoulders. He looked the same and yet different, older maybe, or just heavier with things unsaid. Cathy walked slowly, her pulse thrumming like a distant drum. Hi, she said softly when she reached him. He looked up, his eyes calm, his expression unreadable. Hi. The single word was a bridge, narrow, fragile, but there. Cathy sat beside him, leaving a respectful inch of space. For a moment, they just watched the pond, ducks gliding across the water like tiny ships. I wasn't sure you'd come, Cathy admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure either, he said, and the honesty in his tone was like a blade sharp, but clean. Cathy swallowed hard. Thank you. He nodded, gaze fixed on the rippling water. You've been trying. I have, she said quickly, then slowed, choosing her words with care. Not because I'm afraid of losing you, because I love you. His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. I know. The silence stretched, heavy but not hostile. Cathy let it breathe, resisting the urge to fill it with apologies that would sound like excuses. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small thermos. Coffee, she said, offering it with a tentative smile. Your favorite. Black, 2 sugars. For the first time, his mouth curved, just slightly, but enough to make Cathy's chest ache with relief. He took the thermos, fingers brushing hers, and sipped. Still too sweet, he murmured, and Cathy laughed. A shaky, fragile sound, but real. Before she could speak again, a sudden weight landed on her lap. Cathy yelped, looking down to find a sleek Siamese cat sprawled across her legs like he owned the world. Norman, her father said dryly, as if the cat's dramatic entrances were routine. Cathy blinked, then laughed harder, tears pricking her eyes. Of course it's Norman. The cat purred like a tiny engine, kneading her dress with imperious satisfaction. Cathy scratched his chin, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Her father watched her quietly, then spoke, his voice low. I can't promise things will go back to the way they were. I'm not asking for that, Cathy said quickly. I'm asking for a chance. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. A chance. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a finish line. But it was a beginning. A fragile thread stretched across a chasm, strong enough to hold if they both kept walking. Cathy smiled through her tears, her hand resting lightly on Norman's back. For the first time since the wedding shattered, the world felt less broken. Chapter 12, The Last Honor. Summer sunlight spilled across the garden like liquid gold, warming the rows of white chairs arranged beneath a canopy of roses. Cathy stood at the edge of the aisle, her heart steady for the first time in months. Today wasn't about vows or rings. Today was about something far rarer, a second chance. Ryan squeezed her hand, his smile quiet and sure. Ready? Cathy nodded, though her throat felt tight. This wasn't a wedding. It was a renewal, a promise to honor what had been broken and to rebuild what mattered most. They'd planned it small. Just family, a few close friends, and one man whose presence meant everything. Her father. He stood at the far end of the aisle, dressed in a simple navy suit, his posture straight, his expression calm. When their eyes met, Cathy felt the weight of every mistake, every tear, every sleepless night, and then, slowly, that weight lifted. She walked toward him, her steps measured, her breath trembling. When she reached him, she didn't speak. She just held out her arm, the gesture simple but profound. His eyes softened. For a heartbeat, he hesitated. Then his hand closed around hers, firm and steady. No words, no speeches, just the quiet acceptance of a role that should have been his all along. Together, they walked down the aisle, not to an altar, but to a small table draped in linen, where a single bottle of wine waited. Margaret had found another from the same vintage, tucked away in her cellar like a secret. It wasn't the original. Shattered dreams couldn't be glued back together. But it was enough. A symbol. A start. Cathy turned to her father, tears shimmering in her eyes. Would you share this with us? He nodded, his voice low but sure. I'd be honored. The cork popped softly, and the wine flowed into 3 glasses. Hers, Ryan's, and his. They raised them together, sunlight catching the ruby liquid like fire. To family, her father said. To forgiveness, Cathy whispered. Ryan smiled, lifting his glass. To love. They drank, and for the first time since the world cracked open, Cathy felt whole. Not because everything was fixed, but because they'd chosen to keep walking across the fragile bridge between them. Later, as laughter drifted through the garden and Norman prowled under the tables like a furry monarch, Cathy stood watching her father speak quietly with Ryan. No threats, no warnings, just 2 men who loved her in different ways, finding common ground. She thought of the words her father had written. Live your life. Be happy. And for the first time, she believed she could. Because happiness wasn't about perfection. It was about grace, the kind that forgives, the kind that fights, the kind that holds on even when the glass vase cracks. Cathy smiled, lifting her face to the sun, and whispered to herself, I'll never take love for granted again. Chapter 13 Epilogue. A new rhythm. Autumn had brushed the world in amber and gold, leaves tumbling like confetti across the quiet street where Cathy parked her car. She stepped out, balancing a pie in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other, her heart light in a way it hadn't been for months. Ryan emerged from the passenger side, grinning as he juggled a basket of groceries. Think Norman will approve of the pie. Cathy laughed. Norman doesn't approve of anything that isn't tuna. They walked up the familiar path to her father's townhouse. The air crisp, scented faintly with wood smoke. The door swung open before they could knock. And there he was, her dad, wearing a soft flannel shirt, eyes warm but still carrying that quiet gravity she'd always known. Hey, he said, and the word no longer felt like a wall, felt like a welcome. Hey, Cathy echoed, smiling as she stepped inside. The living room glowed with lamplight, cozy and lived in. Margaret sat in an armchair, knitting with the precision of a general plotting strategy. She looked up, her sharp eyes softening at the sight of Cathy. You brought pie. Pumpkin, Cathy said, holding it up like a peace offering. Acceptable, Margaret replied, lips twitching. Before Cathy could respond, a streak of cream and chocolate fur launched itself onto the coffee table. Norman landed with the grace of a gymnast, tail flicking like a metronome of judgment. He sniffed the pie, then turned his back with regal disdain. Ryan chuckled. Told you. Cathy scratched Norman's chin anyway, earning a grudging purr. You're impossible, she murmured. And for the first time, the sound of her own laughter didn't feel borrowed, felt like hers. Her father appeared with 3 mugs of coffee, setting them down with quiet efficiency. When Cathy met his eyes, something passed between them. Unspoken, but solid. Not forgiveness, not yet. But trust, fragile and new, like a seed pushing through soil. They sat together, the conversation easy, punctuated by Norman's dramatic leaps and Margaret's dry commentary. Ryan fit into the rhythm seamlessly, his hand brushing Cathy's under the table, grounding her in the present. Later, as dusk painted the windows in shades of rose and violet, Cathy stepped onto the porch with her father. The air was cool, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. Thanks for today, she said softly. He nodded, gaze on the horizon. You're trying. I'll keep trying, she promised. His lips curved, just slightly, but enough to make her chest ache with gratitude. That's all I need. They stood in silence, watching the last light fade, and Cathy realized something profound. Life wasn't about perfect plans or flawless moments. It was about grace, the kind that forgives, the kind that fights, the kind that stays. Inside, laughter drifted through the open door, mingling with the soft thrum of Norman's purr. Cathy smiled, lifting her face to the twilight, and whispered to herself, this is what love looks like.